United States and China, two countries that will effectively shape the future of international order. From Indo-Pacific to data hacking, there are a number of issues that the two have, and with no signs of getting better. Beijing's declaration of a quote-unquote no-limits partnership with Moscow is concerning Washington, D.C. The commander of U.S. military forces in the Pacific has raised a sense of urgency in preparedness for a potential attack by China on Guam. This is a small island territory that belongs to the United States, which falls in the Western Pacific region. With China's growing hostility in the region, United States suspects that the Dragon might be preparing a missile attack on Guam. Since Russia's invasion in February this year, most countries have maintained their distance, but not China. Since the invasion, it has been cozying up with Russia. Beijing has refused to condemn the invasion of Ukraine. China says it is because of common interests, but experts say it is a common enemy that is uniting them, and that is the West, which is why US sees it as a threat. And the threat is not empty-funded. The tensions on ground and sea have reached the outer space as well. Now, according to a new report, Chinese satellites have shown their ability to evade and monitor a US surveillance satellite. This is worrying for the experts who are mulling over new norms and rules for space, because the two space powers often play cat-and-mouse games in the orbit. In recent years, both have come dangerously close to each other. To counter China's hostility, US has been working closely with Taiwan, which is, in an unexpected move, has angered China. But that hasn't stopped the two allies from collaborating. In a bid to promote free Indo-Pacific agenda, a US plane flew over the Taiwan's international airspace. This comes just days after 29 Chinese warplanes entered the straits without any intimation. China claims Taiwan as its own territory, so it enters and exits without any permission. But Taipei maintains that it is a democratic, self-governed region and considers the Dragon as the biggest security threat. And for more on this, we are now being joined by Greg Swenson. He is a founding partner of the investment banking firm Brigg, Macadam Limited. Greg, good to see you again and welcome to WION.
Good afternoon, Eric.
Do you see this as a friction over power? Because the US and China have not compromised for long, despite the Ukraine war and Taiwan territory fiasco. What do you think is exacerbating the tension between Beijing and Washington?
Well, there's no doubt that China is supporting Russia and their actions in Ukraine. And you know, with the joint declaration, Xi and Putin have met over 36 times since 2013. And they're opposing the sanctions, and they're actually effective at undermining the Western sanctions against Russia. You know, you see it with, you know, the Chinese buying oil and gas and coal. So it's not just their emphasis on the diplomatic stage, but, you know, they had a 75% increase in purchases of oil, gas, and coal. That's over $6 billion. So they're really undermining the sanctions that have been imposed by the Europeans and the Americans. So it's troubling, and I think there are some security threats that the West and especially the U.S. should take quite seriously. But I'd also point out, Eric, that there are some limits to the Chinese support of the Russians. You've noticed, you know, the Russians requested military aid that has not been delivered by the CCP. They've cut back on technology sales. The sale, for example, laptop sales have gone down 40% from China to Russia. And, you know, the U.S. relationship, the trade relationship with China is a vital economic interest to the CCP. You know, they're the number one trading partner of China, the U.S. is, over $650 billion in trade last year. So, you know, they're not going to do this without limits, is my view.
Greg, the teeth for this tension has reached outer space, like we mentioned in our report. What will be the impact of that in the future, since the world is starting to feel the effects of the Russia-Ukraine war?
Yeah, it's a good point, Eric, and I think this is something that the U.S. has to take seriously. The support for the military, for the defense spending, is completely underwhelming in the U.S. In fact, the last two defense budgets were lower. The increases were lower than inflation. So in terms of inflation adjusted or so-called real defense spending, they're actually cuts. that's completely inadequate. I think, you're going to see, hopefully after the midterms in November and the presidential election in 24, you should see a return. And I hope that the U.S. gets back to a more sensible number, like 5 or 6% of GDP. It's completely it's really underwhelming right now. The Chinese are building ships and technology in space at a much faster pace than the U.S. and the West. So, these are troubling issues that have to be addressed. But I don't think the Chinese are going to do this without regard to their economic interests.
We'll have to end it there. Greg Swenson, as always, thank you very much for making time, Eric, and for talking to WION today.
Good to be here. Thanks.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.